Well, hello everyone. Here you show you right here. Talk about for no problem. And what does it usually mean whenever we talk about job applications and whenever it comes to being asked to take care of any source of occupation or something like that, or anything such as toward what the rules and what the rules and responsibilities would be like most of the time. So it's like you want to know too that whenever you're going to be reading a job description a lot of times, and it's like, yeah, really, that you see it now hiring, on a lot of those signs, right? But a lot of times, like on the posters and flyers and all that, but a lot of times it sure seems that way that a lot of the details about the job description, of course, that you're probably thinking as to, well, really, there are a lot of things that you normally do not see on that poster a lot of times. And it's like, well, really, that, you want to know too with most of those applications nowadays that how come the details are not provided at least until you at least show up for the meeting, or maybe until you at least come to that, the meeting orientation or something like that. But other times it sure seems that way that whenever you do fill out an application, a lot of times that usually you would see something like this right here that talks about requires having knowledge about working in an office, counting, filing papers, and able to overtake the most difficult challenges. So it sure seems that way. Yeah, job assessments, especially if it's job assessments, and anyone who is capable of working with clients in which are in need for technical assistance and need the work, marks upon for the repairs and maintaining a clean and reliable environment as someone who is willing to fill for us. So a lot of times it seems like a lot of these questions are going to be asked whenever it comes to uh, a job fulfillment a lot of times. And so it sure seems that way that the first thing that you might say on there will be like, yeah, now hiring, and then let's just say that, what is the difference between when we say no problem to word that's a problem. And so a lot of times, how many of us have really thought about that, to the point to where that, go ahead and put like the exclamation points right here. So a lot of times it sure seems that way that, what exactly do you think that any messages stating that would really be telling you on for any purpose at all that whenever you're going to be working a job that you really want to handle it as precisely like yeah. And I guess a lot of times it sure seems that way that talk about for the customers, right? But then also based on what the worker, I guess if you want to kind of call them the worker, or maybe even the staff, based on the worker or the staff would highly recommend something to try. So a lot of times it sure seems that way that whenever you do say stuff like, this right here, anything that we have in our offices, and maybe anything that we have that maybe you haven't tried yet. And so it sure seems that way that whenever you do read any sorts of job descriptions, a lot of times, and it's like a lot of times, it's like, yeah, based on orders and based on what is recommended. So a lot of times it's like, yeah, that if you want to start a new sentence like down here and say is toward it, yeah, well, that there's like maybe one paragraph right here down here with at least maybe two sentences that says is toward that the orders is toward that the client asked for some copies for 3 copies to be made by these sizes, by these sizes. And then if you want to go ahead and put on here dash, and then with say the compressed, I'm like, yeah, for the compressed compression file sent by email, sent through or by, sent by email. So a lot of times it sure seems that way that whenever it comes to understanding about jobs and anything, whenever it comes to reading the job descriptions, a lot of times, that would probably be about up to two, maybe about one full sentence right there, and say that the client is asking for 3 copies plus one file to be compressed. So it sure seems that way that whenever you do. You have one sentence right here, maybe that's written in like what's really highly recommended, and maybe 2 or 3 sentences right here on the bottom about is toward anything like somebody it's really optional, you don't really have to do that, or like saying at the very bottom was the original order. So a lot of times it sure seems that way. A lot of these job descriptions like record like on a transcript, that whenever you do read the job descriptions, a lot of times it seems like that everything should work within a faster pace, right? You want to know too that that a lot of times it's like whenever you do answer maybe a certain call for somebody that's asking for a copy of something, or something to be done, and you're like 102 is toward the first thing that you probably say, I'm like, something like, no problem at all, I'll be able to take care of that, and I'll take care of it. And so a lot of times it's like, how can we really overcome those challenges? And you want to know too, is that really a challenge right there whenever it comes to understanding about what needs to be done, and then if you would know and understand very well on those tasks that need to be done and what was already done. And so that's why it sure seems that way that if you're going to be filling out an assessment and maybe doing any quizzes, though, and a lot of times it seems like it's all about testing the knowledge as to what would you do on handling this job performance. And it sure seems that way that whenever you read the job descriptions, you might get the idea to where that, I really honestly don't think that job is right for me, just because of all those demands and all those requests and everything based on the job description. So whenever we look at some of these job details, it's like, number one, that whenever you were actually, whenever you agreed to fill the position, that the first thing you think about is to where that I agreed to go ahead and work this job and do these 3 tasks right here. And, you call for the gift of kindness. And so this right here, talk about for the disability, you'll work right here. But then, I can maybe also add like right down here on the bottom, like, talk about beside your technical failures. But maybe I can also include right here is that talk about checked everything, and everything should be good now. And let's just say that if there would be like any source of recorded data, and let's just say that on average that it was going to maybe be containing the source of language, something like that. I don't know what source of science but your typical data science though, that what exactly do you think they would start is toward it? We checked we checked your system and sorry to say, but these files could not be installed. So it sure seems that way that these files cannot be installed, and let's just say that it's like goes by the double space right here, and let's just say that if there's going to maybe be something like reason for is because of something like these files cannot be installed, and make sure you are online, and your internet connection connection is indicating a good networking. So a lot of times it's like, yeah, networking status. So a lot of times it sure seems that way, that whenever we do check for something, and want to know too that so let's just say that if you're going to be reading the job descriptions a lot of times, and thinking is toward, okay, now hiring, that do you think that you'll be able to take care of these challenges within within 5 hours time? And do you think that you'll be able to overcome some of these difficult challenges? So it sure seems that way, that whenever you do put something to the test a lot of times, and like everybody else would say, is to where that whenever you do apply for a job, that it seems like that you don't really have any idea of what is it that you're going to be asked to do, and then maybe the type of work and responsibilities that you would have. So that's why it sure seems that way, that then number one, you just really want to take a real close look at the job descriptions a lot of times. Well, even with me, that whenever I'm going to be applying for a job, a lot of times that I'm going to be reading the job descriptions a lot of times. But it sure seems that way, that should you really pay attention very closely to these job descriptions, and the fact about whenever you do apply for a job, the reason why that you didn't go any further with maybe with some of the required process of the hiring process, just because that do you think that maybe they might even say that right now we're only accepting 5 applicants, we're only able to hire at least 10 people at a time. So if you do apply for a job, and let's just say that and I know, and I'll even tell everybody here, to be quite honest with everybody, that a lot of the job applications that you probably filled out, quite a few of them, to where you're trying to remember all of the applications on like the companies that you applied for, and you're trying to remember all of them. So that is maybe just a little bit why that they'll encourage anybody that like on your profile, that go ahead and make sure that you keep track. I'm like, you're able to track the responses of those applications a lot of times. But I can tell everybody here that really that applications are just another way of the ticket in line, and I can just put that right here. I'm like, it's really and tell everybody too, if you're lucky to maybe get a call back on for a return for a job opportunity, but it's a ticket. It's another way of saying it's a ticket in line. So what you basically are doing is you are waiting in line to get a response, right? From that company. And so whenever we talk about applying for a job, a lot of times, that it sure seems that way, that that you want to know too, that whenever you do apply for a job, that you spend 30 minutes to maybe an hour filling out that job application. But I don't really blame anybody either. I mean, if you get real aggravated about it, or for any reason at all, that you might say, is toward it, whenever you do fill out a job application, that it's going to ask you to go ahead and set an account. Check out the career resources, and a lot of times, a lot of those job applications are going to say that please check out the career opportunities. Please check out the resources to. I'm like, yeah. So it's basically the resources on our portal. So I say, in the meantime, it could also it could also be about maybe 3 weeks later. And I want to know is to where if you got the job or not, but it sure seems that way. That please check out the resources on our portal. So a lot of times it sure seems that way, that whenever you do fill out a job application, you're going to get mad at it, and then of course you're going to be reading the details about it. And at the time, it sure seems that way, that that whenever you do check out those educational resources, though, that you might think is toward it, you got your you have your chances of winning or losing, or anything such as that they decide to go ahead and give the job to somebody else. So that's why it sure seems that way, that every time we think about, jobs, because everybody say that, yeah, well, you know how that is that, even if you do get the job and knowing about what, responsibilities that you would have and how you would be able to handle them. And so that's why it seems like that in the meantime, think about that to where that if somebody asks you to take care of any source of talk about occupation, right? What the occupation, yeah. What I mean by occupation, I mean by is to where like any sorts of duties and responsibilities, right? So let's just say that if somebody asks you to be a good be a good publisher, and read something. I'm like, yeah, read something to someone, and get their feedback, their feedback about like a survey. But still, I'm just right here. I'm just saying that what's the best example of how do you want to describe this is toward taking care of whenever you call no problem. So let's just say, everybody else might say that sounds more like a request, like if somebody asks you to take care of something, like such as make a copy of something. Yeah, make a copy of something. And a lot of times it's like, yeah, can you make a copy of this? Yeah, sure, no problem. So a lot of times it seems like that when we think about job descriptions, and whenever we do think about any sorts of discussions like that, and you're probably thinking too, is to where that yeah, I know what you're talking about. I know exactly what you're talking about. It seems like that's exactly what the agent is saying. Like if you're talking to somebody there in customer service, I know what you're talking about. I know what you're talking about. I know what you mean. So every time I think about that, though, and it sure seems that way, that number one, that if you're going to be talking to somebody, even by live chat, that you're going to be talking to them, and they're gonna ask you, can you do this? Make a copy of something, and yeah, sure, no problem, and I know what you're talking about, and so it sure seems that way, that every time we think about something such as how do you handle situations between no problem or that's a problem there, and everybody else might say that how those customers are going to feel if you do tell them that that's a problem, because we don't like, yeah, due to maybe technical failures, or if the systems are down or something like that. But it sure seems that way, that when we're talking about you know positions, like which people say is toward it, when we talk about now hiring, that do you think on averages to where that whenever it comes to questions, though, is to where that how is it that you're able to overcome some of these most difficult challenges, and whenever you do read the job descriptions a lot of times. And like you're thinking too is toward that, yeah, well, really, that according to maybe the contract or something like that you talked about from earlier since the interview, right? And you're probably want to know too is that whenever you first start working on a job and on an agenda, that it sure seems that way, that you probably look forward to a lot of things, right? But it sure seems that way, that there is a difference between whenever you actually write and write down your own suggestions and maybe add a comment here or there, and compared to knowing about if you're going to be talking to a client or a coworker and they're going to maybe tell you that this is what we want to see done here at our company, and if you think that that's a problem and if you can handle that. And but I really want to talk about right here, talking about between no problem and that is a problem. So a lot of times it sure seems that way, that the first thing that you really want to think about is that trying to get a better idea of what's going on, number one. So it sure seems that way, that I guess the first objective would be about is toward really, that whenever you do respond, and it's like make a copy of something, and so it sure seems that way, that that whenever you do say no problem, I'll be able to take care of it for you, and so it sure seemed like I'll take care of it. I'll take care of that. I'll take care of it. And so that's why it sure seems that way, that that every time we think about that, so it's like, I'll take care of it. And so you want to know too, if that's another way of saying as to where that, is that really supposed to be a promise, or if that's just really supposed to be about how you correspond with your customers and clients. And like everybody else might even say that that's really, I just really think that it's really about corresponding. Like, that's how you respond in a proper way of manner. But on the other hand, that when we do say something like, well, that's a problem because like we can't do this. And so a lot of times it seems like that that when we do think about jobs, a lot of times that it's like, number one, that you want to know too, that how do you handle situations to where if you were trained on what to do in case something goes wrong. Like people might even say too that in case just in case of something goes wrong, and just in case something goes wrong, that what do you do? So it sure seems that way, that like everybody else might say, that is to where in case something goes wrong, that's why I usually that just in case something does go wrong, that's why we have our temporary tablets. We have our tablets, we have our battery operated tablets. Tablets, or it could also be remote remote control sensors or something like that. So a lot of times, sensors are like so a lot of times, sensors and remote control sensors, or maybe remote remote controlled remote remote operated remote operated monitors or something like that. So a lot of times it sure seems that way, that that people might say that okay, what that is supposed to mean right there, I don't quite get, understand what all that means right there. So like, anybody may even say too that that if you're going to be taught, like anybody say, writing a paper or something like that, and but anyway, any source of review or something like that. So it sure seems that way, that really you'll see what I'm talking about if you were actually there, just to kind of see and witness all that what was going on, right? But at the same time, it sure seems that way that that whenever you do talk, whenever we do think about that, to where the situations that come up, to where that whenever there is a technical failure, or whenever something comes up, and want to know too is toward it that yeah, make a copy of something. Yeah, sure, I know, no problem. I'll be able to take care of that for you. And so, like everybody else might say that you know, on a typical discussion, a lot of times, and maybe that's why some professionals would also recommend to go ahead and do double spacing right there, and be like, yeah, well, really, that go ahead and put a double space right there, and then maybe put like the typical language to where you go ahead and hyphens or something like that. You do it kind of like that, because I know it sure seems that way. A lot of professionals would say too that that you want to know, okay, if that's really the program that's talking right there, or if that's really the client who's talking. So a lot of times these back and forth conversations, a lot of times seem like are always going to include like, yeah, you can read some of those discussions right there, but you're not really quite sure on who's talking here. You can really read the discussions, but then sometimes it takes you about maybe 5% of your time, or maybe 10% of your time, just to kind of realize what's going on, and what they're talking about. And so that's why it sure seems that way. That number one, that you really need to recognize. I'm like, yeah, if you really need to recognize, recognize, you rec, you really need to recognize the situation. So it sure seems that way that. When we're talking about remote, a lot of times, especially like remote work, that you don't really realize what's going on until if you were there, and so that way you can read and review the paperwork and everything, right? But a lot of times it sure seems that way, that when every time you think about no problem, does no problem mean to where that you're trying to calm the person and say that I'll go ahead and do my best. And a lot of times everybody say, anybody in customer service will maybe say that that's usually what they mean. We'll do our best. And a lot of times that's usually how customer service. So I'm like, yeah, we'll do our best. And so it sure seems that way, that can that really be explained in a variety of ways? And people might say is toward no problem, or toward this is a problem. So if you were to say this is a problem, then chances are, like everybody else would say, if you worked in customer service a lot of times, then chances are that what do you think that the customers are going to put on a customer satisfaction survey and all of it. But the way I think about too, though, that when we think about now hiring, that it sure seems that way, that now hiring can also mean is toward it that it doesn't mean be second or third or fourth place in line or something like that, but you want to know too is toward it why don't you put on there urgent. I'm like, yeah, anything like urgency or something like that, or it could also maybe be about is hiring hiring immediately or something like that. Now hiring immediately. Now hiring immediately or something like that. So it sure seems that way, that that every time we look at a job description, though, and you want to know too is toward it, what are the chances are that that even if you were not even scheduled to work a shift, maybe if you do show up for work, and let's just say if you do have to wear a special uniform before you can start your shift, right? And everybody else might even say that if you've been there maybe a couple of times, and want to know too is that that whenever you first get hired for a job, or if you're called for an interview, And want to know too is toward that you may have been told at the very beginning that yeah, well, you had to make sure you have your uniform on and make sure that you got your ID number or something like that with you. But still, we want to know too is that whenever it comes to yeah, technical issues and all, but still. But you want to know too is toward how do you answer the question whenever it comes to like yeah, whenever it comes to answering the question toward it no problem or toward that is a problem, and making a copy of something or anything else that you may have a question about, and it sure seems that way that companies and co-workers are saying that I know exactly yeah, we'll do our best. I know exactly what you mean. Sure, no problem. And so a lot of times it seems like that, yeah, that, and I know a lot of customer service workers would maybe say too that, most of the time you are able to take care of a lot of those requests, no problem. Yeah, I can go ahead and take care of that. But it sure seems that way that when we think about that to where that, you know, uh, you want to know that, how come that a lot of that information is not provided on these job applications. And you want to know too that is to where if you do apply for a job, that we're not talking about joining any sort of club or membership. We're talking about is to where are you are you capable of handling these overall challenges whenever it comes to the busiest times. I'm like, yeah, the busiest times. They talk about the busy times when overtime is needed, and the request for demands when it comes to the difficult challenge. I'm like, yeah, the most difficult for the difficulties. So it sure seems that way that every time you think about jobs, though, that it's like, yeah, the higher demands whenever it comes to the difficult challenges. The difficulties of the difficulties. So yeah, I can also put on here for the challenges. And so how do you know whenever you do, if you do get worn out from after working a job, and how do you think that maybe just a little bit too much is just too much? And so really, how do you know? So much. So really, how do you know that? How do you know whenever so much is too much? Double space there, and what I say is toward really that after 3 hours, even after 3 hours, that after 3 hours that you really need at least a 5-minute break. A 5-minute break, and then also, like everybody else would say too, is that really that how is it that you're able to overcome a lot of those challenges whenever it comes to whenever you do take on a job opportunity. Let's just say if it's something that you're not ready for or just not used to or anything like that. And so that's why it sure seems that way that whenever you do speak about jobs, and we all know too that jobs are something ways of how you want to describe for a job that most jobs yeah, most jobs though that ways of how you want to describe for most jobs that with a lot of jobs that you may think is toward it. Yeah, well, jobs is not it's not the same thing like everybody else would say too. That can a job stand for something like join the club or something like that. Join the club. Join the Club Scout or something like that. At the time you want to know too that based on like and I know like everybody else would say too, just kind of make kind of like a tease about it, but join the Club Scout or something like that. Join the Club Scout, and you're likely one. I'm like, yeah, join the Club Scout, or if you want to maybe say no, that the B should also stand for, you know, by the way or something like that. By the way when the sequel comes out or something like that. When the sequel so when the sequel comes out, then I'll know when I get promoted. So it sure seems that way a lot of times. That every time you think about that talking about jobs and talking about the job descriptions a lot of times, that you want to know too is toward it. Join the Club Scout. By the way, when the sequel comes out, then I'll know when I get promoted. So a lot of times everybody else would say too that are you gonna say that on the cover letter, or are you gonna maybe say something else, such as this toward that really, it's going to maybe take a vote of maybe the rest of the team, 50-50 or something like that. But half the time you want to know too is toward that, how do you really describe the situation toward it between no problem and that is a problem. And I can also put on here even the exclamation point right here is toward it, what's the problem or something like that. What is the problem? I am so glad you asked because, on your I'm like, yeah, so put a question mark right there. So a lot of times it seems like that it starts by is no problem. What is the problem? And I'm like, yeah, that is the problem. What is the problem? And then maybe the next one is maybe going to be is toward that there is a problem. There is a problem. There is a problem. There is no problem. So it sure seems that way that, could that possibly be put in reverse to where that, for, if it's an automated system or something like that. But a lot of times you want to know too is to where that, when we think about jobs a lot of times, that the first thing though is toward it, do you really have to understand that the communication and the language whenever it comes to working with computers and other devices? You maybe have to understand about the situation toward it whenever somebody joins the conversation, and then you can start talking about the things that's come to your mind and all that. So if everybody were to say too that, whenever you first take on a new career opportunity, what is the highest demand whenever it comes to jobs, though? Is it really communication, or is it really about the fact about now everybody knows how to work the copy machine, not know everybody knows how to use the email, or something like that? It seems like a lot of the higher demands are based on the source of communication and language. So let's just say that people might say is to where that, with this live chat and everything, that you want to know too that you have about maybe 4 or 5 people in this meeting room that maybe you won't quite know who's reading this discussion, who don't, you may not know who is all listening to the discussion. And so that's why it sure seems that way, that every time we think about jobs, though, we're not just talking about one person here. We're talking about as to where that, yeah, well, somebody could be waiting for an invitation. Somebody could also be waiting for you to show some good, talented skills or something like that. But in a lot of ways, it sure seems that way, that whenever it comes to problem solving, and then there is a problem or there is no problem. So a lot of times it seems like that, yeah, number one, it's like, yeah, I get it. Yeah, I get it. I understand that now. Yeah, well, I get it or I don't get it. So a lot of times, yeah. So really, what source of attention do we really necessarily think about whenever we think about technical difficulties, and whenever we do think about any sort of discussions like that? And it sure seems that way that whenever you first heard about this job, the first thing that you may have been familiar with and maybe aware of and knowing about is toward it. If you were working there, like if you have so much experience, right? But let's just say that whenever you read a lot of these job descriptions, a lot of times it seems like that although a lot of those applications are always asking about your source of education, and maybe about maybe I'm like, but you want to know too that how come these applications are not really asking you very many questions about is as to where that if you're able to provide some of your own resources and knowledge about how to get programs to correspond and then to transmit your information you get. And a lot of times you want to know too that how come maybe discussion like that was not necessarily as followed. And so that's why it sure seems that way, that every time we think about jobs, though, it's basically another way of saying is to where join the club, because like everybody else would say too, is to where if you did get the job or if you didn't get the job. But one thing that we can kind of keep in mind here is that whenever you do apply for a job, what you are basically doing is you're registering, right? You're just trying to get in line, waiting for somebody to invite you into a room, or waiting for somebody to sit down with you so they can talk to you about that opportunity, right? And that's why it sure seems that way, that that may be one of the reasons maybe why it seems like that maybe a lot of people are just upset about what's going on, and maybe about the fact about by the time exactly by the time I can go ahead and maybe put that down here, is that request that by the time you get what you been waiting for, I can also put on here, quote or dash the gift. I can just say the gift, but like everybody else would say too, that by the time you get what you're waiting for, and it seems like why did you make a big deal? I'm like, yeah, why did you get all upset about it? The waiting process in the first place. So like everybody else would say too, well, especially if it's been a year, and nothing's happened yet, for sure what people are going to be thinking about that. If it's been a year and nothing's happened yet, you want to know too what has been done so far. And so that's why it sure seems that way, that by the time you get what you've been waiting for, by the time you get what you've been working real hard for, and And I guess that is the reason why that everybody else would say too that you look back maybe 3 years later in 102 about to think about your accomplishments, right? You think about your achievements and think about all the hard work that you put into something. But at the time, people might even say if you worked hard enough, it seems like that ain't gonna do no good because you're probably gonna just gonna be the same thing. But I can tell everybody here too that based on my experience, though, that there are some things that you might miss about. There are some things that you may not miss at all about, because like everybody else would say too that when we're talking about jobs, a lot of times, even technical matters, though, it sure seems that way. It's like, is it really measured at least by every year to maybe every 3 years, to where if there's going to be an opening going on, and then they'll say is toward it, yeah, well, really, if you have an account, then chances are that you will more likely your information will be presented to the companies to where that you'll be getting a call back. And a lot of times it seems like that people might say, yeah, yeah, right. I've done that so many times to where it seems like it's all about the fun and games. It's all just for practice. And yeah, by the time it's here, how do you handle that? Whenever I say by the time it's here. By the time it's here, what are your reactions? So a lot of times I'm like, yeah, what are your reactions? A lot of times whenever we think about that. So a lot of times whenever we do think about jobs, though, in the last, I say, yeah, what are your reactions? And somebody might reply to that and saying this toward it, well, about time. Are you going to respond like that? And people may want to know too that how do you respond to that? If you finally get what you've been waiting for, and people may say is toward it, do you kind of put that in one word, just put like that or something like that? You say about time. Yeah, about time. What took so long? Yeah, it's about time. So really, would you really want to put that into any source of equation? But still, that about time. What does that mean? In case of anybody that may want to know too, exactly. Well, what does that mean? But at the time, people say that means that it's you're finally able to cross. It goes from point A to point B, but like everybody else would say too, that the whole waiting process we probably think it was really ridiculous. And but on your hand, that whenever we do talk about the requirements and having knowledge about working in an office and counting and following papers, filling papers, and able to overtake the most difficult challenges. So it sure seems that way that whenever we read about the job descriptions, a lot of times, that number one, that whenever you read the job descriptions, that it's going to kind of make you nervous just because of the fact about all those responsibilities and tasks and everything. But it sure seems that way that whenever you transition from a new career and a new opportunity, right, and that's why it sure seems that way that whenever you do fill out an application, a lot of times, you're always wondering to where you filled out so many of them to where you're trying to remember, did you put in an application to this company already, or did you apply to them yet, or they'll tell you that we never got your application. And so that's why it sure seems that way that do you really just, like everybody else would say too, that was it really recommended, if anything, to spend at least 2 hours a day working on it, take a break from it, and if anything, check out the educational resources available on their website and all that. But at the time, you want to know too, is toward it, that whenever you do apply for a job, a lot of times, that you look at these difficult challenges a lot of times, and you want to know too, is that, the first thing that you want is toward it, I don't even know why I got this job, because maybe if it's 3 weeks later and you realize how hard it is, and that's why it sure seems that way, that you want to just kind of do studies and just to kind of get some ideas about what is it that they do there at the company, and that's why it sure seems that way, that every time you think about a job opportunity, you're not just thinking about that, okay, I'm thinking about, or I have somewhat of an interest of doing that, or I have somewhat of an interest doing this. But, if you were to actually put that into an equation like what I have here, and like 3 weeks at times 5 hours, so if you were to actually put that into an equation, and maybe if you were to talk to somebody about that, how do you think that you would, that other person that you're talking to, and let's just say that if you can maybe come up with a good conclusion for that, like with that, you're trying to solve any problem in the matter, such as toward it, that this right here is supposed to be, if it's supposed to be like any sorts of scenario or something like that, like a solution, like any sorts of solution of the matter, to where that what you really are doing is that you're collecting information, and also that you're just testing the equipment. Like, so talk about for automatically right here. So like, say, how did you do that? So I really, and I can tell everybody here too that and I know a lot of that would probably be, can maybe be explained using HTML type of wording, but on the other hand, that it sure seems that way, that every time I think about that too, is toward it, how did you do that? And let's say for automatic, and really, would I really recommend anybody doing something like this? But let's just say that if you've had a lot of complications with a lot of job opportunities here lately, it sure seems that way, that you want to kind of put that into like a scenario, to where that you're able to explain on a paper form about the situations, and have like a little about 5 paragraphs right there explaining about the difficulties and challenges that you were able to overcome, and then right down here on the center that you want to go ahead and say that you'll do the calculations right here, and right here on the bottom just talk about anything, any sorts of scenarios or anything that talks about ideas, right? And so you want to know too that you really just had to, you really would have to be there and experience all what was discussed right here. But let's just say on average that anybody who's going to be looking at that email, anybody who's going to be looking over that information would say that, just to determine what was going on during the time, and they say is to where just to be able to read the analysis, though, that really that whenever we're talking about information that's recorded, right, and you want to know too, is to where that you may not have any idea what was going on during time until you actually talk to somebody about what the problem was and all that. So that's why it sure seems that way, that why do you think that on average, though, that these people would say that, just to have it all recorded and provided on like any source of documentation or a transcript, like this right here, and maybe not quite like this, but the way I have it word right here, people may say that it starts out with just like a rough draft of some ideas, and then you decide to go ahead and add in some discussions right there. But I tell you one thing, everybody, that whenever it comes to job descriptions, a lot of times, that whenever you read the details about stuff like jobs, and whenever it comes to responses, and maybe about you're reading about the details about what anything that you have to suggest, and maybe comments or anything, and 102 is toward that that is a problem, or what's the problem, or there is a problem, or there is no problem with the job. And so how are you able to overcome that? And that's one thing I had not seen on very many job applications. And I tell you one thing that, like everybody else would say too, a number of job applications that I filled out, I don't recall, really ever being asked too many of those questions. And a lot of times it seems like almost every application that you do read and fill out, that they're going to be asking you about, to where how many years of experience do you have working here, and what's the highest source of education that you've completed, and maybe what were you doing from your previous job, that sort of stuff. And I just really want to know too, is to where that unless if you were referred to somebody else about this job, and a lot of times it seems like that maybe if you do have a better chance of being hired for a job just because it's somebody else was able to provide good feedback for you for that job. And so it sure seems that way. It all kinds comes around, turns around, comes around how you want to pronounce it, but still, but on the other hand too, that when we speak about jobs, that it seems like that based on from my experience, that somebody like a job recruiter or somebody would really have to be there just to guide you and just to help you with the application process. So it's like, a number of times that I've tried, everybody else would say too that, really, they don't really want you to make this look like it's like any sort of lottery ticket or anything else. You have your chances of winning or losing. But based on your experience with working with a recruiter or somebody to stand by with you and just to help, guide you through the application process, it seems like that you have a better opportunity with getting a job. And so a lot of times it seems like that every time we think about jobs, that we're going to say is this toward join the club. It's just another way of how to get you waiting in line, and it's just another way of how to get your attention somehow, and that sort of thing. But on the other hand, the way I think about it too, that you will get mad and frustrated about it, but at the same time, though, it's like I can just remember that the last time I was at job shadowing, and like anybody say that, how that is that whenever you walk into some of these places, a lot of times they're like, some of these places would even tell you that you have to be 18 or older to fill out the application, and you even have to have the right license, and that you may even have to be the senior staff representative, or for staff or something like that. You have to be a staff member or something like that just to apply. So a lot of times, every time we think about a job, though, that you want to know too is to where that jobs can mean a number of things really, but what do we call those jobs? For what we call is the ones where you are really hired off the bat. I'm like, whenever you're hired immediately. So let's just say that on average is to where there's a point to where that they're saying is to where that really. We'll go ahead and, we'll send you another application, but this application is sent to you directly by email. So a lot of times, it sure seems that way, that each time you might check your messages, and they might say this toward it, we'll send you another application, but this one is going to be a little bit different. This application right here, it's waiting, it's in your name, and so like a lot of companies might even do that, to where if they really are interested in want to hire you, then they'll tell you that we'll send you an application directly. And so it's sure seems like, employers, managers would say a direct application. So if they really are needing your attention for any reason, a direct application. And so it's like, sent to your email Or, it could also be a link, a direct link, and a lot of times companies do that too, a direct URL link provided. So, yep. So a lot of times it seems like that those applications, you may think that they're all the same, but like me, I like anybody say too that I get aggravated with them too, but by half the time it seems like that, really, how do you know how much time you spend on is just a little bit too much time, and you just gotta know when to take a break from it. But it sure seems that way, that sent to you by direct email, but the manager might even say that this application is different. Okay, this application right here, it's it's waiting in your name. What we need you to do is that you just sign on the bottom. So a lot of times these managers might say that we just need you to sign this application, sign the bottom of it electronically. You're using the code, and so that the managers might say, if they say, yeah, well, hey, don't worry about the application, or yeah, we'll send you another one, but we need you to to e-sign this e-sign the application. Yeah, please e-sign it with the code. So that's usually what they ask for a lot of times, right? And so it sure seems that way. Yeah. So it's like so whenever we, based on our experience with jobs, and it's like 102 that really you spend so much time filling out those applications, but some of those applications, some of them that are sent directly to you, and the people I say is toward well, really, that how do you know when you do get the job? And so it sure seems that way. People might say is that usually whenever you see your schedule, when you receive an email from your employer, and that's usually how it is, right? Whenever you receive an email confirming, from your employer, you're confirming your first day, and then the orientation. Confirming your first day and the orientation. So I would think that that's usually, when people say that's sometimes usually what you see too, is that whenever you do get a response, and but it sure seems that way that how do you know whenever you do get the job of it? But it sure seems that way that every time you think about job applications, though, it's like you 102 that reading through all this right here, and you're 102 if that's really anything that you're really looking forward to or not. But at the same time, you're likely thinking too is that maybe between now and maybe by New Year's Eve or something like that. But on the other hand, that's one thing I want to talk about here. Talk about between no problem and this is a problem, and what's the best response about that. And but everybody else would say too that really that the best way of how to handle that is to do the best you can, and knowing that after 3 hours really to take a 5-minute break. And but it sure seems that way that during the busiest times when overtime is needed, and it requires for higher demands when it comes to the difficult challenges. How do you know when it is too much? So it sure seems that way that every time you think about that, you are going to think about that toward it. That if you have worked maybe a 5 to maybe an 8-hour shift, maybe out of a whole week, if you were to multiply that times maybe 5, that you think is toward that you've done a little bit more than what you originally agreed to do. And so that's why it seems like messages to companies and to employers, and they say that is toward really that whenever it comes to understanding about employment status and everything, and for sure they'll probably tell you, like, you might get a message telling everybody that yeah, I can go and put on here like on the very bottom right here. You know, I just wanted to thank everyone for your hard work in the job process, in the work process. So usually you would get a message like that. I just want to thank everyone. Your hard work is much appreciated. So your hard work is much appreciated, and then say for have a great day or something like that. But still, your hard work is much appreciated. So a lot of times, that if it's 3 weeks, after you have been working hard enough, and 102 is toward it. If you were to actually put that into an equation, like a scenario, and at 102, that if it's been 3 weeks and you want to know that what all has been accomplished, and so that's why it seems like that people might say is toward it whenever promotions there are going to be announced, and also whenever raises and anything like that, and promotions, and maybe anything new in the development. But I, on the other hand, too, that I really want to talk about how to handle no problem between what is the problem, and so I say hiring immediately, and so those were the objectives I really want to talk about. But like everybody else would say too, that really that whenever we think about a task, a lot of times it sure seems that way. That I try to think about that to where that reading these job details right here, something that you've been looking forward to, even from all the hard work that you put into something. That think is toward it, for what is considered an automatic step forward, and from all the hard work that you put into something, and it's like, yeah, well, really, number one, I guess, does something need to be? Do you really have to be familiar and recognized? Does this something have to be recognized before it's automatically accomplished? And so really, a lot of employers might say if they can see that how much hard work that you put into something, and then employers would say this to where, hey, we are ready to hire you, and unfortunately that we might say that Monday, or if anything, people might say, yeah, or Friday, we ask you to come in and start working your shift, Friday morning, because we got a good opportunity for you. And so that's why it sure seems that way. That do you think that maybe putting it into an equation is maybe going to be a good solution at the time being? But I mean, I don't know if I'm like I don't know if it would really be any use for any particular reason at all. But in case if anybody were say if you haven't tried it yet, and then maybe if you want to go ahead and just like anybody say that put that like into an equation to where just to kind of study and measure about what's been going on, and what do you think could possibly go on in case of this happens. So it's like if you were to do that, then maybe that would give you a real good clue and idea about what is soon to come. And that's usually the way I think about it, is as to what's soon to come, because if you haven't tried it yet, you may just never know. Just be surprised. You may never know what could possibly what could possibly come result to where that if you were able to fix a situation, something like that, for what's so special about that, just be surprised. But anyway, hope best of luck everyone, and thanks for watching everyone, and have a great day.